Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining our platform from across the Louisiana plain, where we are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Hello, State of Freedom family. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. You are the heartbeat of this show. We are only here because of your prayers and your financial support and your encouragement. If you are looking for a way to support us, you can do that by visiting our website at freedomstate.us. You can also just leave us a comment there, tell us how you think we're doing, give recommendations and ideas for new show topics. We'd love to hear from you. It means the world to us that you spend some time with us. We are marching very fast toward Election Day. It is Saturday, and it feels like it's only minutes away. So thank you in advance for taking time out to do your civic duty and to fight for the future of our state by voting for good people and by voting on the amendments in a way that's going to move our state forward. So we have wrapped up the endorsement series with our discussion with Brandon Trosclair on Monday. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Please keep sharing it with friends and family members who reach out to you or who come to mind. I know this is kind of a season where people who tend to be in the know get a lot of calls and emails and texts asking how they need to vote, who people are voting for. So this is a prime opportunity to send them some of those YouTube clips. They're just the short little snack size clips. You can send them full interviews if you think they have the appetite for it. But we really appreciate your partnership in this and getting the word out as far as we possibly can so we can get really great people into office and change the landscape of our state. All of the endorsements we've made to date are also named on the website, and there are links to each of the interviews that we've done with candidates are also embedded there. So please take a look or, just send it to a friend or family member who's, requesting how to vote. That's a great resource that we are updating as we make even last minute endorsements. Today, we will be walking through the amendment recommendations that we have made, and we'll be highlighting a few candidates that we've endorsed who are in very tough races. But before we get into that, I want to take an opportunity today to read Psalm 87 as a prayer over Israel with the horrors that the people there are facing. And it says, high upon his hills of holiness stands God's city. How God loves the gates of Zion, his favored place on earth. So many glorious things have been proclaimed over Zion, God's holy city. Pause in his presence, for the Lord says, here are the nations who will acknowledge me as God: Egypt, Iraq, Palestine, and the Mediterranean people, even distant Ethiopia. They will all boast, I was born in Zion. But over Zion it will be said, the mighty man was born there, and he will establish it. For the God Most High will truly bless Jerusalem. And when he counts her citizens, recording them in his registry, he will write by their names, this one was born again here. Pause in his presence, and the princes of God's feast will sing and dance, singing, every fountain of delight springs up from your life within me. And to me, this psalm clearly speaks of God's love for Jerusalem and Israel. I also think it speaks of the kingdom of God that's within each one of us as we are his dwelling place for the Holy Spirit. But just as a prayer, we ask now, Lord, that you send your mighty angels to protect, to cover, and to fight for the people of Israel and to bring comfort to Jewish people all over the world. We ask for justice for this horrible, murderous invasion, and we ask for complete exposure and judgment for the attackers. We pray for the peace of Israel and the salvation of the Jewish people.
That is beautiful. It's always important to keep in mind, Danielle, that the Jewish people are our spiritual forebears. Jesus himself was a Jew and a good Jew. And it's heartbreaking to see the attack being leveled against the Jewish people. And we are, in fact, keeping them in our prayers moving forward. It is such a difficult time for them, but we know that God is always faithful and that God will bring them through this and will vindicate them on earth. And that is our prayer and our hope and our belief. And as you also said, Danielle, the kingdom of God exists within each of us. And we all have an obligation each day to move forward and advance the kingdom of God on earth, which is what we're doing through our work here. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago at the start of the show, there are some very important amendments. A lot of people, in the throes of an election, they forget about constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. And there are some very important ones on the ballot on October 14th.
Yes, and people have been reaching out to us for recommendations. And I think the reason people are reaching out for recommendations is because not that they don't know the difference between right and wrong and they can't make the decisions for themselves, but it's because the language of these amendments is traditionally very difficult. And I, as my cynical side really tends to believe that it's done on purpose. So it's hard for people to choose how to vote on the amendment. Some people may not vote on amendments just because the language is difficult. And some of them may be voting the opposite way that they want to vote because the language is so difficult. So with that in mind, this is why we wanted to bring forward some recommendations on the amendments. And Chris, with your legal background, has parsed through the wording to make it clear for us and to make it clear for the listeners. So with that, let's start with the first. Well, I would call it the First Amendment. We'll call it Amendment number 1 so we don't get confused. And this is Blake McGill's bill to ban Zuckerbucks. And we are finally seeing it get close to the finish line.
Absolutely. Amendment 1. And Danielle, you're so right. It's some of these amendments are written in such a way that they're almost impossible to understand and read and figure out what they're saying. So we took the time to do that. Amendment number 1 is extremely important because a yes vote on Amendment 1, which we're recommending, will prohibit foreign money or non-governmental money, private donations and money going into the coffers of election officials in order to conduct elections in Louisiana. It will really help to reduce the opportunities for fraud and graft in our election system by prohibiting that kind of dark money in our process. We are making a strong recommendation to vote yes on Amendment number 1.
Yes. And part of the reason this has made it this far is because of you. So thank you for that. And the same for Amendment number 2, which is just reaffirming our freedom of worship.
Yes. And this came about really as a result of the COVID lockdown, where, our governor saw fit to keep open, casinos and abortion clinics, but was shutting down the churches. So people could not go and worship at their religious institutions. And so this amendment will establish in the Constitution that both the act and importantly, the location of religious worship are both fundamental rights under the Constitution and worthy of the highest protection. So a strong recommendation to vote yes on Amendment number 2. That's Senator Mizell's Religious Freedom Constitutional Amendment.
That's right. And I love it. And I hate the fact that we have to be here, but I think the fact that we do have people in our legislature who have heard the people, who have stood up for what's right, even against kind of the political threats of the governor, is really important to me. And I think it speaks volumes of their character. So
absolutely. Very, very important that this be clarified in the Constitution.
100%. So moving on to Amendment number 3, this is about state debt. And if I recall, Chris, when I was looking at the notes, because you did such a great job of outlining this could have been resolved in the spending cap. The busting of the spending cap is why we are here with this. Is that true?
That is a very fair assessment. Our legislature saw fit to bust the spending cap in 2023 and squander so much of our taxpayer money on band uniforms and museums and sports stadiums and so forth. It is unbelievable the way in which our tax dollars are being squandered in the state of Louisiana. Amendment number 3, Danielle, will require that 25% all non-recurring revenue in the state be devoted to paying down debt, specifically teacher retirement debt and the debt of other Louisiana state employee funds. So, by not only will this money be going to a good purpose, it will reduce the amount of revenue that our legislators can squander on things like pork barrel projects or money going to their favorite donors. And I like the idea of allocating this percentage of our money for such important reasons like, again, retirement debt and the debt of of our state employee funds. We've got to pay down some more debt in Louisiana and stop squandering money. So, strong recommendation, yes, on amendment number 3.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of the credit card away from the legislature, which is a great thing, I think. People at home have to pay their insurance bill, they have to pay their mortgage. I think, the state needs to be disciplined in setting their budget to do the same. So the fact that this had to happen again, just shows the lack of discipline, I think, that our legislature has had to date. But the fact that it's brought and the fact that it's coming up for a vote gives us an opportunity to hold them accountable and to really give them not very much wiggle room.
Absolutely. This will give them no wiggle room with regard to 25% of the non-recurring revenue. That's a fact.
That's a fact. And then moving on to the fourth and final amendment, and this is a tax exemption for nonprofits. I think it might threaten tax exemption for nonprofits, actually.
That's right, Danielle. And there's been some confusion about this. There have been some very well-intentioned voters and some good conservative voters who are a little confused about this one. This amendment is, I think, very well-intentioned. It would constitutionally allow local governments to revoke the tax exemption for nonprofit organizations if the local government determines that the property on which or out of which the nonprofit is operating is in such poor condition, physically poor condition, that it poses a risk to public health or safety. And again, I think the amendment is well intentioned, but we're opposing this amendment because of the risk that it poses to Christian organizations that could be targeted for revocation of their nonprofit tax exemption by local governments. And we think that is a risk that we don't want to take. Also, it's the same local governments who have an interest in collecting taxes who will be making the decision about what property is in such bad condition that the tax exemption status is revoked. So it's basically
Wow.
the tax collectors who are going to be making the determination about whether or not they're going to be giving people tax exemptions. And I think that is a conflict of interest there.
Yeah, they're shaking their own hand.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, come on. I mean, you got to have. If it was somebody else, another entity making the decision, then I would say perhaps. But you can't have the fox guarding the henhouse, and that's essentially what's happening here. And the third reason why we're opposing this is this appears to us to be a local issue that local governments should find a way to address without inserting it into the Constitution. We don't believe this is a constitutional issue. If the legislature wants to pass a law regarding this that would be applicable statewide, well, they have the authority to do that. But we still believe it's a local issue and local government should be making this decision, and it shouldn't be applicable across the state, and it doesn't belong in the Constitution. So those are the reasons why we are encouraging a no vote on amendment number 4.
And Chris, as you were just talking about the government determining the condition of a property, that really brought me back to our conversation with Liz Murrell not too long ago, where she was trying to outline that misinformation is very much in the eye of the beholder. And so, the determinant of that can't also be the punisher, can't also be the rule maker and the definer. And it's all kind of wrapped up. I feel like this is very parallel to that kind of idea.
It's so very true. And that's such a good analogy that you make. It is. It's the same situation. It is the government that is determining whether or not they're going to be able to collect money, which is what governments like to do. They like to collect money. And so by granting tax exemption or revoking tax exemptions to nonprofits in this case, they are divesting themselves of money, taxpayer money. And so you can't have all of this being operational within one entity.
No,
And so that's why it's important to oppose the amendment.
absolutely. It wouldn't pass the audit test in a corporation, that's for sure. So,
Not at all.
switching gears, we wanted to highlight three standout candidates that we've recently endorsed but have not had time to interview because of the just the short nature of this election cycle. So the first one I want to mention is actually in my own district. It's House District 53 in Terrebonne and Lafourche. And the candidate that we're endorsing is Willis Trosclair. He is running against two parish council members who, by all accounts, seem to be fine people. But in our view, they are seeking their next political office. And Willis is a businessman. He's very straightforward. He's a call it like he sees it kind of guy. If you meet him, you'll see that immediately. He pulls no punches and he will just tell you exactly what he thinks. And I think that's one of the great and refreshing things about him. He's a true conservative, and he's running because he's fed up with the direction of our area. He's fed up with the direction of the state, and he wants to go after Chris Fentanyl. And he is the only person I've heard really who's not just in this race, but maybe across the races that wants to tackle corruption head on.
Yeah, and that is exactly what Willis is about. Danielle, I had a chance to meet him very recently, and he expressed to me exactly what you just said, that he's opposed to corruption, and he appears to be not really taking donations or contributions from establishment sources. And that is also a breath of fresh air to me. So I think of the candidates in the race, he appears to be the most anti-establishment. And in my view, it's the establishment that has wrought so much of the harm and so much of the damage on tax-paying citizens across Louisiana. So Willis Trosclair definitely gets the nod from us in House 53. Terrebonne and Lafourche, isn't that right?
Yes, and I'm excited for his run. So hopefully he has a very good day on Saturday. And next up is Kelly Hennessy Dickerson, who's in House District 64 in Livingston. And Chris, I believe she has two opponents.
She has two opponents in that race, and they all seem to be basically decent people. But the reason why I'm so impressed with Kelly Dickerson is that she is being attacked by establishment sources and is fighting back. I believe that there was a couple of maybe some kind of an ethical complaint filed against Kelly that was completely frivolous by an establishment candidate. And it is one of these things where she again comes down as the most anti-establishment in the race. She appears to be the most conservative, and based upon the way she's responding to some of these attacks, she seems to have the strongest backbone to be able to get into the legislature and really help the cause of constitutional conservatism. I've been very impressed with some of the things that I've heard her say on social media, and I feel very comfortable making the recommendation for Kelly Hennessy Dickerson in House 64, which, as you may have said, is a district out in Livingston Parish.
Yep. And Chris, as we were just talking, it really strikes me kind of right between the eyeballs that here we are recommending conservative candidates as anti-establishment. Who would have thought, here we are, this is the point in time we are where to be conservative, to value what's right is suddenly, maybe not suddenly, it's probably been happening for longer than I've recognized, because I've probably been a frog in a boiling pot. But just to think that we are now anti-establishment when, anarchists used to be anti-establishment.
Well, it's interesting. It's so true. Exactly. And we are far from anarchists, but it's amazing how where the establishment power is often or always generally where the corruption is. Power corrupts, and the tendency is always there. So when we say we're anti-establishment, basically what we're saying is we're anti-government corruption. We're anti-self-enrichment. We're anti-bowing before big special interest donors. That's what we're saying when we say anti-establishment. And we certainly need good anti-establishment candidates and good anti-establishment legislators. There's no question. And Dickerson definitely fits that bill.
And with a strong backbone, right? I mean, it takes a backbone to run, but it's going to take a strong backbone to bring some legislation. It's going to take a strong backbone to stand up when push comes to shove, which it probably will sooner than later for a lot of these candidates who will become legislators. I imagine that they're in for some tough fights ahead, but hopefully we will have such a great field, such a great new slate of elected officials that it won't be as much of a fight as we have seen in the last few years, where the few conservatives, the few have had to stand on behalf of the many.
Absolutely.
Which is a ridiculous position to be in.
It is a ridiculous position to be in. There's no question. And that's really what we're doing. We're trying to get into the legislature more fighters, more warriors who are willing to stand up to the establishment. And I think Dickerson will be just that.
I think so too. And the third standout candidate that we wanted to mention is Brian Glorioso. He's in House District 90, which is in St. Tammany, and he is making a run against Mary Dubuisson.
Yeah, and this is a very easy choice for us. Brian Glorioso has been endorsed by the Freedom Caucus. He's been endorsed by the Louisiana Right to Life Association. A number of other good, solid organizations have endorsed him. And a big part of the reason also why we're supporting him is because his opponent is the incumbent Mary Dubuisson, who is part of the Good Old Boys Club in the legislature and really has not done anything to advance or lead on issues that we care about. In fact, if you recall, Danielle, Mary was one of the authors in 2023 of one of the abortion bills that would, if it had passed, fortunately it didn't, but it would have weakened protection for the unborn in Louisiana. You and I strongly opposed that bill, and fortunately it was killed. Also, Mary, and I'm sure the voters out in St. Tammany will remember, Mary authored legislation back in 2021, I believe, that would have brought casino gambling to St. Tammany Parish. The casino interests poured tons of money into that campaign, but the local St. Tammany Parish citizens rejected that proposition overwhelmingly, in fact, like 63%. They don't want casino gambling in St. Tammany, but Mary Dubuisson was at the tip of the spear in trying to get it there. So those are two of many reasons why we confidently endorse Brian Glorioso out in St. Tammany in House 90 over the incumbent Mary Dubuisson. And boy, wouldn't it be nice for him to get in there and knock her out.
Yeah, it would be fantastic. And Chris, I know you spoke with him recently and you just had a great conversation and felt like he was a solid conservative candidate who's going to do the right thing and is in it for the right reasons. But I have to tell you as well, I mean, because of this abortion bill that she brought and because she brought that casino bill, and I hate casinos. I just think that they just destroy lives, like I don't really see that much positive. Yeah, they talk about money coming into the local economy. Well, it's being drained out first, right? So I told my mom, I was like, when I heard that she had a great opponent, I was like, what a gift that she has a great opponent. I probably would have endorsed Alf at this point, but I am even more grateful that there's someone really fantastic running for that seat. The people of St. Tammany deserve it.
They do. And Danielle, again, not to spend too much time on District 90, but the two issues that we just mentioned about Dubuisson are only two of a number of issues we could mention. We could spend a whole show talking about Mary Dubuisson's voting record. And so clearly, Glorioso is in fact, maybe we will one day. But Glorioso.
Hopefully we don't have to. Hopefully we don't have to.
Yes. Hopefully we will all be theoretical very soon.
Indeed. Well, Chris, now let's turn to some endorsements of people who we have on the show. I think we wanted to reiterate a couple of names, quite a few names actually, because these are Louisiana First candidates who are in tough fights.
Yes. And again, we can't reiterate enough, Danielle, the names that we're going to mention, these few names of people who are in these hard fights, by no means meant to diminish other endorsements that we've made or other races, because they're all very important. But the ones we will mention specifically today, we're doing so because they appear to be in very tough fights against establishment candidates being put up by the Good Old Boy Network and funded by the Good Old Boy Network, for lack of a better term. So we want to give a good hard push for these candidates so close to the election. So that's why we're going to mention them by name.
Yes. So let's start in the House with Dodie Horton, who's a friend. I mean, these are all friends at this point of the show. You know, they've come on. We've exposed how much good work they've done, how attacked they've been by the establishment. So, I mean, you know, when I say friend, I mean, you know, we really enjoy having them on the show. We enjoy supporting the legislation that they support because it's solid and they have been great. A lot of them have been great legislators and a lot of them stand to be great legislators. So, with that said, starting with Dodie Horton, she's in House District 9 over in Bossier.
Up in Bossier, absolutely. Dodie has been such a fighter in the legislature for the Constitution, for freedom, for liberty. She stood against the lockdowns back in 2020. She most recently brought legislation forward to keep harmful sexual concepts away from our kids. It was her bill, you recall, that will also allow In God We Trust to be put very visible in public school classrooms throughout the state. I could go on and on about Dodie, but she's been a consistent, faithful conservative. And she's running against, interestingly, another quote unquote Republican. Who really is not a Republican. He was trotted out there by establishment interests up in Bossier, who have attacked her for standing against the busting of the spending cap. I really believe that's a big part of the reason why. And she's just been a general thorn in their side. She must be reelected. Can't speak highly enough of Dodie Horton. If you live up in Bossier and you get a chance to vote for Representative Dodie Horton, please do so. We endorse her enthusiastically.
Yes, we certainly do. And next on to Tammy Fopp. She's in House District 18, which is Point Coupee, West Feliciana, West Baton Rouge, and Iberville. And she has two opponents, including the incumbent Jeremy Lacombe, which I know you have plenty to say about.
Jeremy Lacombe is the state rep who ran previously against Caleb Kleinpeter for state senate, and Caleb Kleinpeter beat him soundly in a primary simply by exposing Jeremy Lacombe's voting record as a state representative. It's the same Jeremy Lacombe who became a Republican after he was beaten so badly in that state senate race, but didn't provide any public explanation for why he was becoming a Republican. Certainly doesn't appear to be a philosophical change of heart, but Tammy Fobb is very impressive. She has been on our show and is a true conservative in House 18. So hopefully she wins that race and Jeremy Lacombe is retired permanently from the state legislature. Strong endorsement here for Tammy Fobb, House District 18.
Yes. And next up is Hollis Day. He's in House District 66, which is East Baton Rouge. And he's probably the exception to the rule for the rest of these candidates. He is not necessarily up against the establishment. I mean, maybe there is an establishment candidate in there that I'm not aware that they're establishment, but he is running against four opponents.
Yes. Well, he is running against multiple opponents. When I think of backbone, when I think of courage, when I think of someone who will go and stand and fight for individual freedom and liberty and for our Constitution, Hollis Day is always the first one who comes to mind. I have no doubt in my mind that he has the backbone and the commitment and the confidence to go in and make a real difference. And that's why we're endorsing Hollis Day and House 66. We need leaders like him. His district, as you said, Danielle, is right here in Baton Rouge. So if you have a chance and he's in your district, please vote for Hollis Day, House 66.
Yes. Next on our list is Kathy Edmonston, who we just heard from pretty recently. She's in House District 88, which is Ascension, and she is running against two good old boys who just became Republicans before qualifying.
Yeah, and I would like to ask her opponents. I haven't gotten really an answer for other than vague generalities why any quote unquote Republicans would even challenge Kathy Edmonston.
Yeah.
She's been so faithful to the citizens of Ascension Parish, faithful to the citizens of Louisiana. She perhaps, among all of the good legislators that we have, she stands apart as someone who has always stood up against these vaccine mandates, these lockdowns for our students, for individual freedom. She's just an outstanding person and has been a great legislator. And as you said, why would her two opponents be converting to the Republican Party only days before qualifying to run against her? That doesn't strike me as real philosophical conservatives. That brings up real red flags in my mind. So, for all those reasons, Kathy Edmonston is the only choice in House 88.
Yeah, they sound like wolves in sheep's clothing to me. But
Indeed.
all right, next up, Mike Segur, who is running against a wolf in sheep's clothing in House District 92, which is Jefferson and St. Charles. You're one of your absolute favorite / most despised legislators.
Yes, atrocious Joe Stagney, the only legislator in 2023, the only Republican who saw fit to vote the prohibition against gender mutilation of minors across the state of Louisiana. The only Republican. And we have already talked about Joe Stagney so many times. We could go on and on about him. He is truly atrocious Joe. He's been a stain on the state legislature. We are so thankful that Mike Segur announced against him for House 92, which is Jefferson Parish and St. Charles Parishes. Strong endorsement here for Mike Segur for House 92.
Yep. And not unlike Mike Segur is Charles Marsala, who's also challenging an establishment candidate, also in Jefferson. It's House District 94, which is Jefferson and Orleans parishes, and he's running against Stephanie Hilferty.
Who has done nothing except in the legislature except damage the cause of constitutional conservatism and individual freedom, particularly when it comes to schools and what our kids are exposed to in school. She and Barbara Freiberg have both been real thorns in the side of good legislators trying to pass good legislation to protect our students in the state of Louisiana. She's just been horrible. Also, she's the one, Danielle, who advanced legislation back in 2021 that allows the leasing of state property, state acreage over in her district
That's right.
for commercial development. And of course, Hilferty happens to be a commercial real estate agent. And so she absolutely has a conflict of interest there. But that's one of many reasons to oppose her. We've had Charles Marsala on the show. Very impressive. I think he will do a great job in the House. House 94, strong recommendation for Charles Marsala in Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish.
Yeah, can't say enough about him. He is a guy who is a doer. You know, he doesn't just see a problem, but he makes moves to invoke change. And I just think that that's super commendable. And it just shows what kind of legislator he's going to be. This is not a guy who's going to recommend 85 studies instead of actually getting things done.
Absolutely. Marsala was the one who impressed me on the show so much with all the issues that he brought up that are so important. He was in one way or another, directly or indirectly, affected by the dysfunction in the system. And that's what caused him to get involved and to begin to push those important issues. So these are not theoretical concerns for Charles Marsala. He has been affected by these issues. And I think that militates strongly in favor of his motivation to go in and do things to correct the system.
I think so too. And while there are many other endorsees that we could mention in the House, let's move on to the Senate, because there is a slate of Senate candidates that we have endorsed who stand to change, the future of the state. If every single one of these candidates that we're about to mention gets in, we are in some serious fighting form that we have not been in a long time, if ever. So I'll just start out, Chris, with Ray Garofalo. We had him on the show a couple weeks ago. He's representing Senate District 1, which is Orleans, Plaquemine, St. Bernard, and St. Tammany.
Yes, and Ray has in fact indeed been on our show. Had a great opportunity to talk with Ray to share his vision. You know, Danielle, as we get into these Senate candidates, it always comes back to my mind the phrase, the Senate is the chamber where good legislation goes to die. And I have seen that with my own two eyes. And if these candidates win, the ones that we're going to go to, Ray and the other ones that we're going to mention, the culture of the state Senate will, in fact, be changed, because the difference between success and defeat in the Senate on a number of critically important issues has been razor thin. If you take away two or three of the Senate, four of the Senate rhinos that have existed in there that have killed good legislation, that's the difference. And if these candidates win, that will more than make up the difference and will change the culture in the Senate. But Ray is running against Bob Absent Owen, and that's my moniker for Owen because he's absent so often for votes. And when he is there, he often votes against the interests of his constituents. There's really no comparison between Ray Garofella and Representative Bob Absent Owen. We are certainly pushing hard for Ray in Senate 1. He has the ability to go in and begin to change things in the Senate on day one, and will do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving to the next candidate is Tim Kerner Jr., who we just loved having on the show for a number of reasons. But he's in Senate District 8, which is representing Jefferson and Plaquemine. He's running against Patrick Connick. And he is just an inspiring figure to start with. I mean, he's a real doer. He's a roll his sleeves up kind of guy. And he is tackling, talk about an establishment swamp creature. That's who he's tackling.
You know, Danielle, it is so inspiring to me that Tim Kerner is running such a strong race against. When you look up the term establishment politician, I think you would have to see Patrick Connick's picture right next to it. He's hurt us in so many ways, opposing a bill to protect land in Louisiana, not showing up for votes, opposing the Second Amendment, our gun rights, opposing employers' rights not to force vaccines on their employees. It's just up and down the line. Connick has been horrible in the state Senate. And that's really why Tim Kerner is challenging him. Tim, as you know, is the former mayor of Lafitte, very popular and very, very impressed with Tim Kerner, Senate 8, Jefferson and Plaquemine's parish. And I think that he is going to push through and win that race. And God, I hope so.
I hope so too. And that's one that's going to be decided in October for sure, because there's just two in that race. So we're going to be watching that one very, very closely Saturday night. Everybody be praying for, of course, the whole election, but I think that's a big one for us. Next up is Valerie Hodges in Senate District 13, which is Livingston. Valerie's been a real fighter. She has brought some incredibly positive legislation on behalf of the people, and she's running against Buddy Mincy, who was seeking to undermine state sovereignty.
Absolutely. You know, we've talked about Valerie and the legislation she's brought several times, had her on the show, as you said. So we can talk about a lot of great things she's done, but I want the listeners to just remember one very important item of legislation from 2023, which was Representative Hodges' successful bill to prohibit our foreign enemies from buying immovable property or acquiring immovable property in the state of Louisiana. Hugely important piece of legislation that she pushed through all the ups and downs, got it passed. So we're so gratified for that. And again, so many other things that she's done. As you said, she's running against Mask Up Mincy. And I call him Mask Up Mincy because he was one of the ones leading the charge and doing Governor Edwards' bidding during the COVID lockdown to keep us locked down, vaccinated up, and masked up. He did nothing to stand up for the citizens of Livingston Parish, just did nothing. But I think he was Governor Edwards' errand boy during the COVID pandemic. And also, as you said, Danielle, he sponsored and put forward an atrocious piece of legislation which would have compromised Louisiana sovereignty when it comes to how we certify and reciprocate and qualify our teachers in the state of Louisiana. Senator Mizell, in killing that legislation in the Senate Education Committee, basically said as much, that this bill is a compromise of Louisiana sovereignty. Mincy is terrible. I would shout euphoria across the state if Valerie gets in and beats him, and I think hopefully she will.
I think she will. And, you know, Chris, when you mentioned that bill that she brought to protect Louisiana state sovereignty and to reaffirm that when it comes to our land and immovable property, I just saw what a study in contrast. That escaped me as we were preparing for the show today, that Buddy Mincy wants to undermine state sovereignty and Valerie Hodges is doubling down, tripling down on it. And I just think, what a clear choice.
it's so interesting that those would be the two bills that we just brought up here. And I know it really wasn't planned. We're going through and we're just talking about this, but you're so right. What a study in contrast. She brings legislation to assert the sovereignty of our state. He brings legislation to compromise that sovereignty. And that really is a perfect microcosm of the difference between these two candidates. There is no choice. Valerie Hodges, Senate 13 out in Livingston.
Yep. And the next candidate up is one who is close to my district. He's not in, I don't get the opportunity to vote for him, but I have been a huge supporter. Stephen Swiber, a breath of fresh air over in Senate District 21, and he covers Terrebonne, Lafourche, St. Mary, and Iberia. And he's running against two candidates who are entrenched in local politics. And Chris, when I was just thinking about this race this morning, all I could think about is, these guys are touting their experience. And what really comes down for me is what are the results? Your experience does not equal results. I don't want to hear about your experience if you can't show me what you have to show for it.
There is such a thing, Danielle, as good experience and bad experience. And if I had to choose between good experience and bad experience, obviously I would choose good. But if I had to choose between no experience and bad experience, I would probably choose no experience because Stephen will be able to go in and learn the mechanism of the legislature. Of all the candidates that we've had on the show, he strikes me as someone who has perhaps the deepest understanding of the real issues that we face as a state. Not that you can tell by listening to him that he has studied the issues, he understands the issues, and importantly, he has real solutions. I would encourage our listeners at some point to go back and listen to our interview of Stephen just for their own edification, because I was so impressed with his knowledge and really how solution oriented he is. So Stephen Swiber is our strong recommendation for Senate 21, as you said, down in Iberia, Lafourche, St. Mary, and Terrebonne.
He is. And I think, one thing I was struck by when you just said that he understands the policy issues, I think he also understands the policy mechanisms. He talks about having studied policy, and just when you listen to him, you get that he has an understanding of it. And I think it won't be hard for him to get right in there and get to business. So I'm excited to see him trounce the other two. Would love to see no runoff, but we'll see how things shake out on Saturday night. And we'll be back with those results for everybody on Monday.
Yes. Before we move on to the next one, Danielle, I just wanted to mention, when it comes to being an outsider candidate, that race strikes me as the one where there's, a true outsider running against real insiders who really have done nothing for the state. So the outsider candidate, Stephen Swiber. I just wanted to say that.
Very good. And next up is Blake Miguez, who's in Senate District 22, which covers Iberia, Lafayette, St. Landry, and St. Martin Parish. And that guy is in a serious fight. Thank goodness he's a fighter, because he has 5 opponents.
5 good old boy opponents out there in Senate 22. And, probably, there are 2 or 3 other hotly, really dirty races going on out there. And this is one of them. It's like the entire political establishment over there is coming out in force against Blake Miguez. The Paula Davises, the Paige Cortezes, the Clay Scheck-Snyders, the Stuart Bishops, all of the good old boys who have done nothing but drive the state into the ground are doing everything they can to defeat Blake Miguez, who has been a faithful constitutional conservative in the legislature. He's done so many good things, but I do have to mention one in particular, the constitutional amendment, Danielle, that's on the ballot that will keep the dirty, dark, illicit money out of our election process. The Zuckerbucks bill, that's Blake Miguez's bill that he fought hard to get through the legislature that we have a chance to vote on. So that's just one of many good things he's done. And again, when you have the usual suspects that I just named coming out against a candidate, if I knew nothing else about Blake Miguez, I would vote for him for that reason alone in Senate 22.
Yep. It's a good instinct. It's a very good instinct. which would also carry over into the next race, which is Alan Seabaugh. He's in Senate District 31. I mean, Alan, talk about another fighter. This guy is not going to back down from a fight. He is covering Grant, Natchitoches, Rapides, Red River, Sabine, and Wynn parishes. And the local swamp seems to have drug out a good old boy to prop up in a race against him.
Yes, a good old boy who is being funded substantially by the trial attorneys, which is a red flag. And according to Allen, if you ask his opponent, where do you stand specifically on this issue, or what would you do here? Doesn't he appear to have a grasp of the issues? He speaks in generalities, but doesn't seem to have a real appreciation of the issues or what he would do to change anything in our state. He's a former basketball coach. I love basketball, not knocking basketball, but he doesn't seem to have anything in his background that really has prepared him to be a state senator. Allen has been a steadfast constitutional conservative in the House, a leader, really the leader among the conservative caucus in the House, and it will be a great. You talk about someone, Danielle, who has the ability to change the culture in the state Senate.
Yeah.
Alan Seabaugh is at the top of that list.
Yeah. And, when you were talking about this, Chris, it just jogged my memory of our conversation with Alan. And it's really remarkable that the trial attorneys, you would think that attorneys might stick together. Now, of course, not everybody in a certain umbrella group kind of sticks together or even has anywhere remotely near similar viewpoints. But I just think it's so funny that the trial attorneys would support a coach, probably a very nice man, instead of an attorney. It just shows that this is not about who they think is going to be the best candidate. It's about who's going to be the best candidate for them.
That's right. A very, very narrow interest. Sometimes I think that some of these folks would sit there and watch the state sink into quicksand as long as their own narrow special interest remained untouched. I don't think that that is the way that we should be looking at issues as we face the state, certainly not when it comes to the kind of state that our children and grandchildren are going to be inheriting.
Yes. And I want to clarify the point I just made as well. I think in another race, in another moment, that there might be a very fantastic coach who could go up against an attorney and the coach could be the right person in the race. So this isn't about, for me, this isn't about profession or background. This is about why you're in the race, who you intend to serve should you win the race. And that's really what my comment was about. I don't want that to be misunderstood at all. Just because Alan happens to be an attorney, I don't necessarily think that makes him the best candidate. His backbone and his track record make him the best candidate.
Based upon what we have actually seen. It's not just theoretical. We've actually seen him lead on issues that matter to us. He is a proven commodity and has demonstrated that he has the backbone to stand up for things that are very, very important. And I agree with you 100%. That has nothing to do with his opponent's background. Ronald Reagan, one of the greatest leaders in this country of the last 100 years, was an actor. And, so the background isn't what matters. It's who he's being funded by, and also his apparent inability to answer in an articulate way what he would really do to serve the citizens of his district as a state senator. So that's really what it comes down to.
That's what it comes down to. And next up is Stuart Cathy, who is representing Senate District 33, which is Claiborne, Lincoln, Morehouse, Washita, Union, and West Carroll. And this is another person who we can say that the establishment has dredged up a candidate who's playing dirty politics.
Absolutely. You recall that Stewart indicated that my opponent is trying to buy first he tried to buy me and he couldn't do that. So now he's trying to buy the office. Well, he certainly has put a tremendous amount of money into this race in order to defeat Senator Cathy. He's called Stewart a career politician, which is somewhat perplexing because Stewart just finished he's in his mid or late 30s, and he just finished his first term in elected politics. So how that makes him a career politician is beyond me. But importantly, Stewart, important things I want to bring up about Stewart. One, Stewart authored the legislation, the great omnibus nullification resolution that passed both houses that declares Louisiana's right to nullify unconstitutional federal acts. So important that we have that resolution on the books because the feds will be trying to lower their heavy hand on the state in the future. It's coming. He stood strong on that, got that through. And also, he was instrumental in getting Blake Miguez's constitutional amendment to clean up our elections through the Senate, fought hard on that and did that. Number of other things we could say about Stewart. There's no comparison here. This good old boy is challenging Stewart because he wants to use the state Senate as a vehicle for his own personal aggrandizement and enrichment. Well, that's not what the state Senate is for. And Stewart has done a good job, and he's going to do a good job when he returns. So we are strongly recommending the reelection of Stewart Cathy in Senate 33.
Yes. And the last candidate we want to mention is one who just was such an enjoyable conversation. I think anybody who listened to our conversation with Randy Bush just thought immediately, what a likable guy, what a guy that I would want to sit down, spend some time with, and just, enjoy a meal. He's representing or seeks to represent, I guess, Senate District 37, which is Tangipahoa and St. Tammany. And he has two opponents, including Bill Wheat.
Yes. And Randy is such an energetic, passionate conservative. And I was just so happy when I heard that he was going to be challenging Bill Wheat because Bill Wheat, while a decent human being, and nothing that we say here is personal, has quite frankly been very weak in the legislature and has made some votes that are very contrary to transparency in the education system. He voted also in favor of these windmills out in the Gulf of Mexico, these 25,000 acres of windmills in the Gulf that hopefully will never occur. He voted for allowing private corporations to seize private property for this carbon capture Joe Biden green energy racket, and a number of other things that we could go on about. So Bill Wheat has done us no favors in the State House. Randy Bush answered in writing our survey, did very, very well on it, and I believe is a committed constitutional conservative that will help to change the culture in the Senate. So very pleased to endorse Randy Bush for Senate 37, as you said, Danielle, in Tangipahoa Parish and a small part of St. Tammany.
Yes. And as we're just kind of closing out this Senate run through of endorsements and just reminding folks of the races that really are kind of heated up and intense, I think it bears mentioning the original purpose of the Senate, Chris. I mean, the original purpose of the Senate was for candidates, was for people who were sent by a broader locality who were a little bit further removed from the day-to-day business of the extreme local, the state representative, so that they could kind of take in what's going on at the national level, what's going on at the broader state level, and how does what's happening at home going to impact that and vice versa. It's someone with a bit of a bigger picture.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. The state Senate is a bit removed. The demographic territory of their district is substantially larger than in the House districts. And their responsibility that they have is extremely serious in that chamber. And the Senate has the ability to kill great legislation after it comes over from the House. Unfortunately, Danielle, the Senate president has had such a stranglehold on the Senate, really has ruled that chamber with an iron fist. And all of these candidates that we've mentioned for the Senate, I truly believe to a man here will be able to go in and stand up to the entrenched establishment interests and always remember that they represent the citizens of the state of Louisiana. And if they get in there, boy, it will be a new day, not only in the state Senate, but really a new day in Louisiana.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be a new day in Louisiana. I'm speaking that. I'm prophesying that over our state. We deserve a new day. We deserve the right kind of people. We deserve righteous governance. We deserve justice. And we deserve people who are going to look at the sanctity of the taxpayer dollar and really understand that blood, sweat, and tears that was not theirs went into it. And so they need to think very carefully about how they spend our money and the accountability for the money that is spent. Well, look, we're looking forward to seeing how Saturday shakes out, how November shakes out. Honestly, of course, this has been a very busy season for us, and we know that the listeners can sympathize with how hectic it has been trying to get all of these candidates in and doing the work that we're doing through LeCag. And I just want to mention one more time that our stressing of these candidates was not meant in any way to diminish any other candidates that we've endorsed or any other races. We've just focused on these because they're in tough races, and they're fighting establishment candidates for the future of the state.
And we need them. That is
Yeah.
exactly right. We need them. One final point that I also want to make here, Danielle, is that all of the candidates that the State of Freedom and LeCag have endorsed, whether we've talked about them today or not, they fall into one of two categories. Either they are incumbents with a proven track record of constitutional conservatism and fidelity to the citizens, or they have responded in writing to a very detailed questionnaire that we have submitted to them, and they've responded in a way that assures us and commits themselves in writing to doing the right thing on the issues that matter to us. So there will be accountability. Gone are the days where we have candidates who run on one platform and govern and legislate on another. We have every intention to hold all of these candidates accountable. It's not going to be a situation where we are endorsing candidates, supporting candidates, helping candidates to win, and then forgetting about them. Oh, we've done our job once they get in there and they have carte blanche to do whatever they want to do. Not at all. We intend to hold them fully accountable for every commitment that they've made to us and to citizens across the state once they are elected. Because if they don't honor those commitments, Danielle, then we're going to begin to target them and to remove them as well. And I think they know that. I'd like to believe that everybody who's elected to office, when they do right, the things that are right, they do them because they have the deep conviction to do them. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. We all have a capacity for evil in us and for misjudgments. Our founding fathers knew that. And so we intend to hold all of these candidates accountable for being faithful to the interests of Louisiana citizens. And I just wanted to make sure that our listeners and our supporters know that.
Yes. And I'll just add to that, Chris, we didn't just get surveys back. We have met with, the lion's share of these candidates we've met personally. If we haven't met them personally, we've spoken to them on the phone. And the truth is, if they responded in a way that is faithful and true to how they feel and their heartfelt convictions, none of this is going to be a problem.
No, it's not going to be a problem at all. And I truly do believe, Danielle, that these are all very, very good people. And I believe that they see the issues that we're facing. And the reason why they're running is because they really want to do something about it. It's unfortunate, however, that often when people get into office, the corruptive influences of politics in Louisiana, particularly when you're in positions of substantial power, are very nefarious and very strong. And even well-intentioned people sometimes are affected by it. And so we just simply have to continue to hold people accountable. But I do believe that all these candidates and incumbents want to do the right thing. And if they are elected, boy, they will have a great opportunity to do so.
Yeah. And I think the fact that we are expecting a great number of true conservatives, of real, honest, values-driven legislators to be elected, that we can expect that they will provide and support and backbone to people who may have otherwise, in another setting, fallen victim to the corruption network of Louisiana politics. So I hope that's the case. I'm really believing it, Chris.
I'm believing it too. Everybody has worked very, very hard. And I'm just very heartened by the quality of the candidates
Yeah.
that are running who we have endorsed.
Yeah.
Real quality people. And so we will continue to work hard, continue to advance. And I don't ever like to close, Danielle, without, first of all, thanking the State of Freedom supporters, subscribers, donors for supporting our show. We are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism across the state only because of the support of our increasing number of listeners and supporters. And it's just with deep sincerity that I express my gratitude for everyone who can hear my voice right now who supports our show.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a reminder, our website has all of the endorsements and amendment recommendations. So you can check that out. It's just freedomstate.us/endorsements. If you want to forward it to friends and family members, neighbors who are looking for a little bit more insight on how to vote and to better inform themselves. And the endorsed candidates that we've interviewed have links to those episodes. So you can do that. And as I mentioned earlier, you can share the YouTube clips as well. And Chris, just as a reminder, a lot of these candidates are getting supported through LeCAG by various means. The listeners can support these candidates now and through November by donating to LeCAG at lecag.org and give us the PO number. It's amazing. I haven't memorized it yet.
That's quite all right. It took me a while myself. It's LeCag, PAC, LACAG, and the next word is PAC, PAC. The address is P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70896. And you can also donate online at lacag.org. Your donations enable us to continue to support and help good conservative constitutional candidates in Louisiana, because we will and we are, with your help, returning the state legislature to the people. And that's what it's all about for us. That is the ultimate goal, is to make our legislature accountable to the citizens of our state.
Absolutely. And I think we will. I really think we will. I'm so hopeful. I think next episode, maybe just as a teaser, I intend to pull out all of my very nerded out spreadsheets, and Chris and I are going to talk about what we stand to gain, what is at stake here, and the races that we are going to be watching with laser focus on Saturday.
That is going to be an exciting show. We are so close to the election, so excited to be this close. And until we meet again, Danielle.
Yes.
Each day we will take another step to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Have a wonderful one, Chris. Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, lacag.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.